Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very special CNBC Africa broadcast in collaboration with Brand South Africa. We are here at the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, where we will be discussing the outcomes of the 10th annual BRICS Summit that was held here in South Africa in the month of July. Of course, thousands of delegates from all over the BRICS region, that's Brazil, Russia, India, China, joined us here in South Africa to discuss how best to pursue inclusive growth and shared prosperity for the fourth industrial revolution. But did the summit meet its expectations? This is the discussion that we are about to have, and ushering us through some of the views. Here are our panelists. I'd like to start with the gentleman on my right. That is Dr. Petros de Kock, who is the General Manager for Research at Brand South Africa. Next to him is Mr. Stravos Nicolaou, BRICS Business Council member, and he is also Aspen's Group Senior Executive, responsible for strategic trade. And we also have Mr. Michael Ethanaro, a General Manager at Marco Polo South Africa. Gentlemen, thank you so much for giving us your time and welcome. Now, the President, Cyril Ramaphosa, as chair of the BRICS this year, in his closing remarks, hailed the summit as a, quote, tremendous success. And I'd like to hear your views on whether you agree that indeed it was a tremendous success.
Well, I think it was a week or more of, I think, marathon diplomacy for South Africa. If you look at not just the program of the BRICS, the heads of state meeting, if you look at the year preparation, the summit, but then also what happens after that, it's not only a success in the sense of we've had successful meetings. I think if you look at the levels of exchange between the BRICS members themselves, on all levels, the regional outreach, the heads of the regional economic communities that were also invited to partake in the heads of state meetings and exchange. I think the impact of the BRICS is now beginning to be felt, as 5 developing nations that are very clear on their objectives of collaboration of developing nations. And I think maybe just history is quite important sometimes. If you rewind us back a century now, what contact was there between a China and a South Africa, or a China and a Brazil, for that matter? So the work that's being done now in the BRICS in the past decade is very clearly showing new conversations, new energy of the developing world, trying to find practical contact points and solutions to our own problems as developing societies. And I think that's making the kind of spirit and engagement of the BRICS very unique in this century.
So I take it you agree with the President?
Definitely.
And Stavros, you as a member of the BRICS Business Council, perhaps you can take us through your thoughts on what they were able to achieve and whether you agree that, in fact, the summit was successful.
So I think, firstly, let me say I'm going to speak more in practical business terms, in terms of how we viewed the summit. And I'd have to agree with the President. It was successful, just practically and operationally speaking. And what I mean by that is, and I'm going to put my South African hat on only and not necessarily a BRICS hat, because I'm looking at how did South Africa necessarily benefit from this. I think our single biggest challenge right now is to unlock investment, both domestic and international foreign direct investment. And a lot of unlocking sentiment means that you've got to restore sentiment and confidence in the country. We've been through a difficult patch. We continue to going through a difficult patch. I mean, the indicators of restoring sentiment. And I think for me, the single biggest thing that the summit did, and our interactions as a business council with business people, was that there is some restoration of confidence, which is going to assist with the President's $100 billion investment drive. For me, that's a very important element. Why do I say that there's been some restoration? It's obviously in your interactions with business people. They're starting to view the country differently. They come here, they experience firsthand how we can execute and operate on, and implement on things. They see firsthand the type of institutions we've got. And the type of dialogue that takes place gives confidence, and confidence brings success. So for me, if we did nothing else right in the summit, but just achieved that, that's a significant development. I think some of the other areas that were particularly successful for me is, we're part of a very important bloc. And it's a bloc that does provide some counterweight economically and in trade terms globally. But what it does importantly, it links us up with important technology partners. So when we look at the fourth industrial revolution and look at the early stages that we're at in our country, it does allow us to accelerate our entry into the digital economy, with the pros and cons that comes with that.
And I want us to get to the pros and cons shortly. But just as we, open up to find everyone's view on how the summit was. Michael, as a man from Brazil operating a business here in South Africa and also on the rest of the continent, did the summit restore your confidence? Do you feel better about doing business going forward?
Well, I think that there is a path. There is a path that has been running for years, and this BRICS Summit is somehow consolidating those ideas. There were many talks on regulations. There were many talks on bringing down barriers. There were many talks on how to open a little bit more the countries, just not on the political arena, but also practically. So I would say yes, and the fact is that we are a company based already here 20 years ago, so for us it's not new. But yes, I can see some more illusion coming from other countries, other companies. So I would say that it's been the ground is being established, and now confidence is coming back, and obviously we will need to see it in practice. I will also highlight the outcome of the working groups. There are 9 working groups in the BRICS, and there are good results in all of them, and practical landed projects in place. And I believe they will bring more outcome in that sense, not only on the way investment, not only in political, but also in practical, specific projects that will get all the countries more united, and the companies will be more, they will be willing really to take more part in it.
And of course, this meeting happened at a very difficult time. Now, the global relations between many countries are under threat. We have got countries wanting to go their own way and not embrace globalization. But the BRICS countries did stand against that, supporting multilateralism. What did you make of that? And I ask because I want to know, was it the best way forward for BRICS and the other African countries that supported a more united working stance as opposed to one that is very singular that US President Donald Trump is proposing?
In fact, last week we released an updated research report with the title, The BRICS Brand from Economic Concept to Institution of Global Governance, when we address exactly some of those issues, looking at the decade of BRICS summits, what's been happening in terms of the development of the organization. But I think one thing that the BRICS, the nations have been very clear about from the outset. You can look at every summit declaration, other engagements between the countries and heads of state. Multilateralism is the bedrock position of the BRICS on engagement in global affairs. That the BRICS, a lot of analysts that we look at in the report as well indicate high levels of surprise at the level of, number one, institutionalization of the BRICS, but also how clearly the voice of the developing world is being articulated here, that in this period we cannot retreat behind walls and isolate ourselves as societies, that in an ironic twist of geopolitical fate in the 21st century, developing nations are now becoming the advocates of free global trade, counter-isolationism, for multilateral solutions to challenges facing humanity. So I think that is in line with all the foreign policies of the member states, but I think it's also creating a very firm position for South Africa. And I think what's interesting about the global climate that we are in, these Trump and trade war and Brexit and these kind of things, is that societies who in the 20th century were the advocates of integration, globalization, etc., are making stunning about turns on those issues. So we are flipping a lot of debates, like even on climate change. If you look at the summit, the Johannesburg declaration of the summit, the first a huge chunk of it is devoted to climate change, to environmental issues, and so forth. So it's very interesting nuances coming to the fore, I think, through the BRICS in showing a new type of engagement and role we as developing societies want to play in our own development and learning from each other. And I think a lot of the platforms open through the BRICS, the think tank, the business council, ministerial engagements, all of that is mutual learning. It's exposing us to other problem-solving techniques, other technologies, other innovations, that you won't find, typically in older traditional relationships we maintained.
And Mikhail, I mean, Brazil, even a very similar economy as South Africa, when we look at the dynamics of growth, when we look at the dynamics of the number of young people that don't have jobs. Do you also see the BRICS stance on, standing against protectionism, what the US is proposing, as being one that is complementary to BRICS, but also still allowing countries like Brazil to have their own personal relationships with other nations?
Well, I believe that each country needs to defend its own personality, way of doing, and way of working. But in this global world, it's inevitable that you really need to work in your area. For example, Brazil is also inside the Mercosur, so that means that there are some other countries around Brazil and within the Latin American area that work together also. And then Brazil is also taking part actively in the BRICS. I think that multilateralism, as we were talking here, is the key, and globalization, part of the definition is going global. So you can think local, you can think global. You will need to act locally, but looking at the global world and how it is moving. So I think that the position should be of being comfortable as a country with your own personality, your way of doing things, your culture, but also being part of the world and defending your own way of working, and in the end, opening your mind to new opportunities. We were talking here that the BRICS, it's basically an opportunity window for emerging countries to evolve to a different level of development in different social, economic. So how cannot you embrace that? You need to be as a country, but you also need to be open to that way of working in the world, I guess. And Brazil is a big country with some similarities, as you said, with South Africa, true. Brazil has been working hardly on how to develop youth, how that pyramid on young people need to come to be more present and need to be the main actors of a film. But not only looking inside, but also looking at different relationships with countries in the Mercosur and BRICS. So I believe everything is possible. It's a way of attitude. This is what I think we are facing here. If you're open to be kind in that sense and be economically intelligent to develop your country, but also develop in group, I think that the result can only be positive.
Mm-hmm. Let's hope.
Yeah.
But the Fourth Industrial Revolution, also a very big theme at this summit that did take place. Stavros, from your engagements with other business people, what did they make of how our leaders were preparing to embrace the opportunities and also the challenges that this new digital future will bring?
So look, if you look at the 5 countries within BRICS, they're at different levels of development and embracement of the digital economy, or the 4IR. So if you look at China, they're well advanced. We're lagging behind here as South Africa. Mm-hmm. And in fact, you could say that we haven't even reached the 3rd industrial revolution yet, which is industrialization or reindustrialization. So you might take a negative view around that, but I see it very much as a positive, because what it does allow us to do is we can leapfrog the 3rd industrial revolution and accelerate towards the 4th industrial revolution.
How?
So, for example, manufacturing. Manufacturing, for me, is the single most important would-be growth driver for our economy. So if we want to start reaching growth levels of 5.5%, which are outlined in the NDP and where we need to be. We know that as a country. We need to move from 1.5% to 5%, and we need to do so quickly. Manufacturing would be an absolute bedrock in achieving that. So can we use the technologies that exist in the digital economy, such as blockchain technology, artificial intelligence, big data? Can you use that to accelerate growth in your manufacturing sector? most definitely you can. I see that as a major opportunity. Now, manufacturing, industrialization, beneficiation, all form part of the same grouping. Those are things that will have the proper multiply effect back into your economy. So you're going to have up and downstream activities, you're going to have job creation, and the key for me is how do you link the third and fourth revolution in our, industrial revolution in our country to accelerate yourself into the fourth industrial revolution. I coined a phrase at the business forum. I said, because the 4IR and digital economy is a lot about disrupting. So we need to disrupt to accelerate growth. So if I had to summarize it, that's the way I'd see it. So I see the 4IR, notwithstanding that we are lagging behind some of the economies, part of the reason or the optimism around being in BRICS is it does allow you to be in a club where the bar is raised quite high, and it gives you that opportunity to elevate yourself quickly up to that level. And that's the 4IR opportunity I see for South Africa.
Nice phrase, disrupting to accelerate growth, by the way. But it does...
I'm going to patent it.
Not to be a pessimist, but for me, a beautiful phrase. It sounds easier said than done, though. Doc?
Look, I think the interesting dynamic that we face is in this century is that there's certain tipping point moments in human history when it comes to technologies, and it's well articulated in this kind of industrial revolutions, first, second, third, fourth, etc. I think, yes, and I fully agree with Stavros in terms of the potential those technologies have for problem solving. Like, for example, in Kenya, in a number of years, they found that just the introduction of basic cell phones to farming communities provide access to markets. Instead of having to schlep a whole 2-3 hours to go and sell your stuff and find you get to the market and the price of cabbage collapsed overnight. You can check the price, as basic as that. Am I taking my stuff to the market today or am I waiting until next week, So anyway, so from the basic things that we assume as normal sometimes, yes, technologies open opportunities. But I think as developing societies, and I think the Indian delegation articulated this through the Indian statement on this, that we also need to be very careful that all our societies have unemployment, youth unemployment particularly. Now, if you look at the 20th century, a lot of productive human activity in car manufacturing, etc., the deeper you go into the century, the less human labor you need in the manufacturing process. So what we need is then a very engaged process, of understanding where the new technologies unlock potential, create new jobs, new opportunities in the economy, but how do you deal with your basic human development challenges that you have as a society? So I think that's where the tension in that debate is going to lie for the coming decades. And I think as human consumers, I think probably we will have to raise our level of awareness, of how do we engage with the technologies and the societal consequences of that. For good or bad, ultimately.
I want to come back to that, but just to finish off, and perhaps, Nikal, if you can pick off on Stavros's point about the importance of the manufacturing sector in accelerating growth. You play in that space. So the viability of our manufacturing sector in South Africa here actually stepping up to the mark, given the conditions that it's currently in.
Well, we've been here for more than 20 years now, and with manufacturing capacities. And I would say that it hasn't been easy, on the sense that we have had to develop all the supply chain, on the sense of bringing technology from Brazil. That transfer process is not easy. And we faced challenges, on the sense that there were very small companies that we needed to upgrade in technologies, also always in partnership, in technology, in numbers, in volume, so that they could somehow fit our needs as well. One of our biggest concerns yet today is skills. We find that, for example, in Brazil, our workers, the people we hire, the skills are already there. Let's say that there are technical colleges that they've been identifying properly where will be the needs. But 10 years ago, they identify where will be the needs, and they develop specific training so that now companies in the manufacturing environment, we just simply hire trained people. And then the process of bringing them to the company takes a month, 2 months in training. Here in South Africa, we struggle with that. We need to invest a lot of money and time when we hire people to get to those skills that we require in that sense. So I would say that supply chain and skill development is something that needs to be worked a little bit more in that sense. Coming back to the digital transformation, for example, in our company, we believe that in the whole group, we are now investing on digital transformation. And in fact, we look at it as a way of creating more jobs. In which sense? The most efficient we get, more markets we can tackle, and more products, or faster we can define new solutions and products. So maintaining the workforce and even increasing it. Vast bodybuilding is very dependent on manpower and knowledge. There are not so many robots. It's not so automated as it may be the automotive car industry. So for us, it's a big opportunity because using the big data and using the new technology, the new digital tools, let's call it like that, we are being able to be more efficient. That means that we are able to develop new products quicker and get to the markets with a better solution. And then we can open markets as well. So for us, we see it as an opportunity, and we're working on that already.
So the next golden decade of BRICS, final thought. What should we do to make sure it's truly golden?
In my opinion, first of all, believe it. Oh, it's true. We need to have the basics, the pillars, and all of us, we need to understand in our different way of thinking, different way of working. And then work for it. I'm a man that believes on vision working. So you define the vision, and then you start working daily, monthly, yearly. So this, for example, BRICS Summit also helps us to identify what is the vision. What do we want together? So based on that, then you start working. And I think that the working groups, the 9 working groups, they've got that capacity also of identifying and highlighting which should be the projects that will take us further in this decade. So I really believe on those working groups, and I think they're doing a good job. Let's believe on them and move. That's my final conclusion.
Stavros?
So 2 things. I think, first of all the energy that some people are putting into questioning whether we belong in BRICS or don't belong, etc., rather put your energy in how do you unlock value within BRICS. So I think that's the first thing. I think we're long past that debate, but it's quite disappointing when people keep bringing you back into that. And I think the numbers are quite definitive. At a trade level, growth in trade has been significant and justifies our existence. We might be what some people call a minnow partner in BRICS. Let's also not believe that. When we sit at the BRICS table, we enjoy the same rights as China or India or any of the other countries. And let's also remember when we sit there, we're representing Africa and the regional integration agendas. Important to realize the golden decade. Lastly, we need to start operationalizing projects more than what we're presently doing. We need to start seeing the tangible delivery on things. So I think those are the 3 elements for me that are critical to realizing the golden decade.
I think on my side, if you look at, for example, in the research report we released on the development of the BRICS brand, I think there's 2 lessons that come from it. The BRICS need to remain consistent in what it's been doing in the past decade. Now, some indicators, like at University of Toronto, there's an entity called the BRICS Research Group, and they look at compliance and implementation of summit decisions. And they find on average, after every summit in the year after that, BRICS nations implement roughly about 70% of summit decisions, which is a very high level of commitment, really making it real. But I think
most people won't even know about that.
But I think to Stavros' point, in as much as in this decade we've seen a lot of success, I think there's a very positive break point now in the BRICS, that as we go into the next decade, there's huge momentum that's been built. And I think now we can capitalize on some of the basic ingredients that's been put in place. So a lot more work remains to be done. But I think through continuing on that course of implementing what your decisions are, and I think maybe more, showing it more. There's a lot of activity between the countries, but I think a lot more can be communicated, at the level of what is actually happening on an annual basis. Because yes, the summit is the big moment every year, but throughout the year, there's on an ongoing basis engagement. So I think we need to get more of that news into the markets and build on that to create that bigger mutual understanding.
Well, gentlemen, thanks so much for your time this morning and sharing your thoughts with us. And to our fantastic audience members, thank you also for your time as we really discussed the outcomes of the 10th annual BRICS Summit that South Africa hosted as the chair of BRICS under President Cyril Ramaphosa. General consensus was that the summit was indeed, in the words of the president, a tremendous success, but certainly a lot more that the BRICS countries can do. They are not small by any measure. 40% of that global population, 22% of global GDP. They do have some muscle to ensure that, particularly on the continent and amongst themselves, issues regarding skills development, funding the infrastructure gap, sharing inclusive growth and shared prosperity are certainly adhered to. But as we wrap up this discussion, we look ahead to the next golden decade rather, of BRICS. From myself, Fifi Peters, and the CNBC Africa team here at the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, it's bye for now.